Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. No mai, haere mai, and greetings all. As the General Manager of the Parnell Business Association, it gives me great pleasure to welcome today's guest, Sir Ray Avery, as part of our series called Parnell Eco Bites, short and sharp topical conversations in the eco space. 8 to 10 questions, one presenter, released monthly. As hopefully mindful businesses, we're constantly challenged by innovative ideas and how we can best adopt those that will propel improvements in healthcare and climate change. But do we give a thought to developing nations and how they are coping with these challenges? Both of these are passions of our guest, Sir Ray Avery, so sit back and enjoy. I'd now like to hand over to Josephine Rudkin-Binks, who's a board member of the Parnell Business Association and our sustainability champion, to interview Sir Ray. Over to you, Joey.
Kia ora, Cheryl. Kia ora, Sir Ray. It really gives me great pleasure to introduce you to today's Parnell Business Association Eco Bites. So Sir Ray Avery is a former street kid turned ethical entrepreneur, scientist, humanitarian, author, and philanthropist. Ray has used his skills to improve and save the lives of the world's poorest people through his many inventions. Ray's background includes being a founder member of the Department of Clinical Pharmacology at the University of Auckland, as well as technical director at Douglas Pharmaceuticals and the Fred Hollows Foundation. He's also been the deputy chair of the New Zealand Health Innovation Hub. Ray was named New Zealander of the Year in 2010, received a knighthood in 2011, and has won many innovation awards. So welcome, Sir Ray, and thank you for talking with me today. We know you're currently living in Australia, so tell us a little bit about what you're doing now.
Well, I'm still doing very much what I was doing in New Zealand. In fact, I've always been a global citizen. In fact, I've lived in New Zealand for 50 years, but I've probably only spent 30 years there, in the sense that I travel so much internationally. So India's a second home, Nepal's a second home. So I'm an international man of mystery. I just travel around the world doing good stuff.
And tell us a bit about that stuff, Ray.
Well, years ago, we worked out that we could make medical device manufacturing factories in developing countries and make critical medical devices much cheaper in places like Nepal than we could in the US. So I'm now building a super IOL laboratory in Nepal, which will be able to manufacture about 2 million lenses a year. And by the time my youngest daughter is my age, that'll translate to about 200 million people having their sight restored. So I like to do things at scale and come up with clever technologies that make a difference.
That's awesome. That's awesome. And we know that you work specifically focused on developing nations, and then we know that those nations are most vulnerable to sort of climate change. So sort of what's keeping you awake at night?
Well, oddly enough, fast fashion. Fast fashion is a major contributor to global pollution, and it's also one of the underpinning things about social inequity in developing countries. So fast fashion really started in the 90s, where organizations like Zara would make very cheap clothing that could be turned around very, very quickly. And the way that they achieved that was to use cheap labor. And originally cheap labor used to be countries like China, and then it actually, right now, most of the mainstream companies are looking to places like Ethiopia, where the annual salary, monthly salary is about $26 US. So they're actually not only producing products cheaply, but they're actually using pretty much slave labor.
Gosh, yeah. And so what do you think is holding companies back from really developing a more sustainable supply chain?
Well, there's two parts to the thing. First, it's important to understand just how bad it is. That about 10% of the global carbon emissions come from the fashion industry. So 10%. In fact, nearly 20% of wastewater and the cost of making these things sucks up more energy than both the aviation and shipping industries combined. So it's a big, big problem. Even strangely enough, even washing your clothes produces, because what we do is we're not using natural fibers. What we're doing is using polyesters. And basically, when you wash your clothes, little microfibers get into the ecosystem. And that equates for us in a normal year of producing about 50 billion equivalents of plastic bottles, 50 billion equivalents of plastic, just by washing your clothes. I'm not suggesting you don't wash your clothes, but if you use natural fibers, you don't have that problem. So we need to sort of think about that. And there are some companies that are looking at this from a true circular economy. There's actually a company formed in New Zealand called Kashmiri, and they work with hand weavers. And this is the other important thing about environmental stuff. If you go back to a true circular economy, what you end up with is people making things with their hands, and then they're made from natural materials. They get used and hopefully become heirloom products because they're not fast fashion. And a portion of the funds that Kashmiri makes, they put back to providing education for the workers that they have on the handloom. So it's a true circular economy. And of course, most of the fast fashion doesn't have any of these elements in it. What it does is it just uses a slave labor and pollutes the other thing that happens is about 85% of all the clothes that we get end up in landfill, and that then produces methane. So that's not even on the carbon equation. So it's a major problem. And the only way, to go back to your question, the only way is to get people to be aware of that's the first thing, because most people are not aware that it's an actual global problem that's actually bigger than most of the other things like plastics in food packaging, for instance.
How do you think companies could help raise awareness of that topic?
Well, I think the problem is that it's always this dilemma about the chicken and the egg, which comes first. Is it that the consumers want the product and therefore the manufacturers meet the consumer's demand, or is it that the manufacturers create a product that the people want to buy? And I think realistically it's the former, in the sense that women particularly love to have new items of fashion to show off. I mean, my wife finds it difficult to walk past a shoe shop, and so I think unfortunately what we've got to do is to try and get the manufacturers themselves to do more like an Allbirds kind of manufacturing process, where they do think about the environment impact of the materials. So you can't just, and swapping out cotton is not really a thing. It takes about 3,000 litres of water to make one cotton blouse, for instance. So we've got to find sustainable materials that we can use, and hopefully they're long lasting and don't, in the act of washing, end up polluting our seas,
Absolutely. I think a lot of people, I myself wear 20% of my wardrobe 80% of the time. So we certainly could be more mindful.
Yeah.
You've mentioned a couple of organisations, Kashmiri and Allbirds, but is there any other organisations or companies that you think are really leading in this space?
Not really, not in terms of a true circular economy, because most of them, there are lots of greenwashing companies out there, but they don't do the one critical part is the human component. And I think I love the idea that people make things by hand, and there's some intrinsic love involved in that whole process, rather than these big looms pumping stuff out. And also, by the very nature of it, it means you can't really have fast fashion. It takes a while to actually knit a pashmina scarf or something like that. And therefore, they become more precious, and they're natural materials which could be recycled, whereas we can't do anything with polyester. It's just go to the tip, or worse still, they burn them sometimes, and that produces methane as well.
And other pollutants. Yeah, absolutely. So we're running these Eco Bites as part of our Parnell Business Association. And if you think of a business, what would be sort of one piece of advice that you could give?
Well, I think it's for everything that we do, I think, in life, and whatever your business is. A good example is in Nepal, where we make these intraocular lenses. We put them into a case, which is a little blue case that the lenses can be visible against the blue background. And when the operation's done, that case is ground up and used as an eye patch. And then we bake it, basically, when it's too old, we grind it up again and make it into a new one. So every part of what we do, from the beginning of it, we start thinking about from a circular economy perspective. And that's what I'd encourage people to say. Ideally, your product will be one that people love and enjoy, but doesn't add to the woes of the earth. So think about everything in the food chain from a true circular economy. So, and particularly, not just the materials of construction, but how it's made is important, because the how is often what causes the pollution, and certainly causes social disequity around the globe. Probably the fabric industry and the fashion industry is responsible for more social disequity than anything else. And you often hear about the fires in factories in Korea or China or somewhere. And when you see them firsthand, they really are horrible places.
One organisation that I think is doing the circular economy really well in terms of product is Interface. I don't know if you know of those. It's carpet tiles, and they very much do, like you've explained, with the making into the eye patches. So that's a good example. And if anyone listening wants to support some of the causes that you're involved in, what could they do?
Well, I think they should support the Fred Hollows Foundation with the laboratory that we're building at the moment in Nepal is probably going to be one of the largest factories in the world, and they can donate to the Fred Hollows Foundation, and that'll help speed up the whole process. And it's a true circular economy, because you give sight back to something, they get their life back.
Absolutely. Oh, well, thank you so much for talking to us today. What a wonderful legacy you're leaving for your girls. So please do keep up the amazing work, and thank you so much for your time, Saray.
Okay, thank you too. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Kia ora.